And now for a message from our sponsor. Please welcome Christine Bader, Senior Vice President, Chief Operating Officer for U.S. Generics at Teva, in conversation with Christine Simmons, Senior Vice President of Policy and Strategic Alliances at the Association for Accessible Medicines. And thank you for your support of this program today.
Hello and welcome all. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Christine Simmons. I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy and Strategic Alliances at the Association for Accessible Medicines, and I'm also the Executive Director of their Biosimilars Council. AAM is the nation's leading trade association for the makers of generic and biosimilar medicines. And I'm very excited to have you all here virtually with us to learn about complex generics and the very timely subject of the Generic Drug User Fee Amendments, also known as GDUFA. And I want to especially thank Teva, who supported this program today through an educational grant, which has enabled AAM to host today's session on this important topic. So to put the scope and impact of this topic to patients in the healthcare system in context, in the United States, generic medicines are 90% of all prescriptions dispensed, but account for only 20% of total drug cost. Joining me on the virtual stage is Christine Bader, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for U.S. Generics at Teva Pharmaceuticals. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So let's begin with the basics. What are complex generics? And also, I'm curious about the urgency of this issue, given that there are various competing health policy priorities before the new administration and the Congress. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic, and also enhancing the Affordable Care Act and other issues. So can you talk a bit about why stakeholders should be thinking about complex generics now?
Sure. So first of all, complex generics, similar to other generic medications, cross all kinds of therapeutic lines, treat things from schizophrenia, multiple sclerosis, cancers, and diabetes. But something about them is more complex than traditional medications. That can range from the API to the dosage form, and oftentimes it has to do with the drug device or the delivery system. Some products that you may know that we would consider complex are epinephrine auto-injector and inhalers such as generic Advair. What I would say about the urgency is that complex generics are an untapped opportunity to bring additional savings to the system. Alex Brill's study shows that just 7 of these complex generics that are already available in Canada or Europe could bring savings of an estimate of $1.3 billion per year to the American system. So if we're going to continue to get the savings associated with generic medications, we're going to have to figure out how we more efficiently get approvals for complex generic drugs.
That background and context is very helpful. Well, let's go ahead and dive into GDUFA a little bit more. I know many in our audience are more familiar with PDUFA, which pertains to user fees for brand drugs. Can you give us the background on GDUFA, the Generic Drug User Fee Amendments?
Sure, happy to do that. But before we do that, I do just want to say that we should be super proud of the efforts that we have made between legislatures, regulators, policymakers, and manufacturers to have the success with generic drugs that we have had. It's a collaborative effort, as we all know, and 90% of prescriptions is a big number. $300 billion per year in savings is something we should all be extraordinarily proud of. The good news is in 2012, GDUFA was passed in an effort to speed the efficiency of approval for generic drugs. And that would therefore stimulate competition and ultimately bring savings to the healthcare system and, most importantly, patients. We have an opportunity now with our 3rd round of GDUFA that it is up for renewal every 5 years. And so we will be having a new GDUFA in 2022. We have an opportunity to tweak those things that maybe weren't necessarily contemplated fully in 2012, because again, we had very different drugs in the generic application cycle. Now that we have more complex drugs, there are new needs and new systems and infrastructure that needs to be built to support those approvals. And the amazing thing to me about GDUFA is that we're all very much naturally aligned. right? Everyone in the entire system is excited to be able to create better access and lower cost. So when we have alignment of intention, we should be able to come up with a structure and an infrastructure that supports the efficiency of approvals, and then we all win.
Well, that's great. So, Christine, you mentioned that approvals for complex generics have been stagnant in recent years. How long does it generally take to get a complex generic approved by the FDA? And can you talk about the impact of that time frame on patients and on the industry?
Sure. I mean, the unfortunate consequence is every month that you have a generic that is not approved, you don't have lower cost access for patients. That then drives up the overall cost to the healthcare system. It's a complication for payers. So what I would say is the last statistic that I've seen is that it takes over 44 months on average to go from application to approval. And on complex generics, we're seeing timelines sometimes that are even longer.
So, on that note, what changes are Teva and other industry stakeholders looking for?
So again, the good news is that I think that all the stakeholders are very aligned in what we're looking for, which is to get affordable medications to patients as quickly as possible. And there are three things that we think would really aid in that. One is increased transparency. If there is an issue, if there is something that they can tell us as an agency, please tell us. The second would be predictability. Understanding timelines and expectations are essential to ensuring that as a manufacturer, we take steps to be ready to support generic launch. And the third thing would be better guidance practices overall, whether that's discussion of product-specific guidances or CRLs.
So, Christine, you just mentioned increased predictability, better guidance practices, and more transparency. Let's pause on these and ask you to just go into it a little bit more. What would improvements in these areas mean for manufacturers? And what about patients? How are these issues impacting patients?
I mean, the second half of your question is really the most important, right? Which is, what do we do to get lower cost alternatives available to patients? And any delay in the approval, any inefficiency in the approval process slows down that shared goal that we have. So these mechanisms that we just discussed, including better guidance practices, are a vehicle in which we can remove inefficiency and work together collectively to ultimately get more affordable medications to the market and create better access.
Thanks so much for breaking that down. Now, I know that we have covered a lot quickly here, and I want to be sure that everyone has your key takeaways top of mind as we conclude. So can you please give us a quick recap? What are 3 key takeaways you want the audience to have from our discussion today?
First, the policy matters are urgent. With the global pandemic and the economic crisis that we are all anticipating in this country, it is essential that we get affordable medications to the market as quickly as possible. The second is that generics are a vehicle for success and something as Americans we should all be very proud of. Generics save an average of $300 billion per year, and 90% of the medication that people take is generic. Complex generics, a recent study by Alex Brill, suggests they could save another $1.3 billion per year for just 7. So think of the infinite possibility of the amount of money that we could potentially find to fund other areas of our healthcare system, which is exciting. And the third thing is that the time is now. We're negotiating GDUFA, which is a great vehicle to align policy and structure to ensure that all the stakeholders that are very committed to affordable medication and are aligned can speak the same language and work together to accomplish a shared goal.
Super, that's great, Christine. Thank you so much. And thank you for all that you and Teva do for America's patients.
Thank you very much. It was great to talk to you today.
Thank you. Thank you to Christine and Christine. That was great.